Most founders do not have a hiring system. What they have is a hiring habit, and it's a reactive one. A seat opens up, they post a job, they get flooded with applications that they're not prepared to evaluate, then they run a few unstructured interviews, then they make a decision based on a gut feeling. Now, sometimes that works, but more often it doesn't. And the cost of a bad hire is not just the salary. Research from the SHRM consistently puts the total cost of a mishire at between 50 and 200% of that role's annual compensation. Once you factor in recruiting time, onboarding, lost productivity, team disruption, and the eventual cost of replacing that person, that's a lot. Now, for a $90,000 hire, that's a $45,000 to $180,000 mistake, and that is before any compliance exposure. Now, the problem isn't that founders are bad at hiring. The problem is that hiring is a system, and most founders are running it without one. They're making consequentially, legally fraught, brand-defining decisions with no documented process, no structured evaluation criteria, and no protection against the dozens of state and federal laws that govern every step of the process. So today, we're going to walk through what a real hiring system looks like for a scaling company. Not theory, just the actual components. How to build a role before you post it, how to run interviews that produce defensible, comparable data, how to navigate multi-state compliance without a full legal team, how to choose and set up an ATS, and how to build an employer brand that makes the best candidates come to you. Now, this is the infrastructure that separates companies that hire well from those that are always one bad hire away from a crisis. Now, the most common hiring mistake happens before a single candidate is contacted. Founders write a job description based on what they think the role looks like, then they post it, and then they discover mid-process that they're not actually sure what success in the role means. Now, the result is a process that evaluates candidates against a moving target. And the foundation of a defensible hiring system is the role scorecard. Now, that's a document that defines, before the process even begins, exactly what the role needs to accomplish. Not just the tasks and responsibilities, but the actual measurable outcomes expected in the first 30, 60, and 90 days. So what does a successful hire look like 6 months in? What are the 2 or 3 things that this person must be able to do exceptionally well? And what are the non-negotiables and what's trainable? Now, this matters for 2 reasons. First, it makes evaluation consistent. When every interviewing is assessing candidates against the same defined criteria, the process produces comparable, defensible data rather than competing gut feelings. And second, it protects the company legally. Structured criteria-based hiring is the single most effective defense against discrimination claims because every decision can be traced back to documented, job-relevant criteria. So the job description that gets posted publicly is a marketing document. The scorecard is the internal operating document. Conflating the two is where most hiring processes break down. Unstructured interviews feel natural, they feel like a real conversation, and they are remarkably bad at predicting job performance. Decades of research in organizational psychology show that unstructured interviews have a predictive validity of roughly 0.20 on a scale of 0 to 1. Now, structured interviews is where every candidate is asked the same questions in the same order, evaluated against the same scoring rubric, and that has a predictive validity of 0.51. That's not a marginal improvement. That's the difference between a process that is barely better than a chance and one that is genuinely predictive. So structured interviewing is built on 2 question types. Behavioral questions ask candidates to describe specific past situations. So for instance, tell me about a time you had to deliver a project under a compressed timeline with incomplete information. That logic is that past behavior is the best available predictor of future behavior. Now, situational questions present a hypothetical scenario relevant to the role. So for instance, if you discovered 2 days before a product launch that a key integration was broken, how would you handle it? So now together, these 2 types of questions produce evidence, not impressions. And the scoring rubric is what makes the data comparable. So each question should have a defined 1 to 5 scale with behavioral anchors, specific descriptions of what a 1 response looks like versus a 3 versus a 5. So when interviewers score independently before debriefing, the process surfaces genuine disagreement rather than burying it under the influence of whoever speaks first. That debrief structure, score independently, then discuss, is one of the most underused tools in hiring. Now, one more thing on interviews. Know what not to ask. Questions about age, national origin, religion, marital status, pregnancy, disability, or anything that can be construed as probing a protective characteristic are not just inadvisable, they're actually legally actionable. So in a structured system, this is not left to individual interviewers to navigate on instinct. The interview guide is reviewed and approved before anyone sits across from a candidate. Now here's where things get genuinely complicated and where the cost of not having a system becomes very real very fast. Employment law in the United States is not a single set of rules. It's a layered patchwork of federal law, state law, and in many cases, local ordinances. And they don't always point in the same direction. So a founder hiring across multiple states is not managing one compliance environment. They're actually managing as many as they have employees. So consider a few of the most consequential areas. Now, ban-the-box laws restrict when and how employers can ask about criminal history. Federally, the EEOC has guidance on the topic, but at the state and local level, the rules vary dramatically. For instance, California, New York, Massachusetts, and Illinois have some of the most restrictive frameworks, requiring employers to conduct individual assessments before any adverse action based on criminal history. Now, violating these laws is not a technicality, it's a source of class action exposure. Salary history bans now exist in more than 20 states and several major cities. The intent is to prevent pay discrimination from compounding across jobs. Now, the practical implication for employers is that asking a candidate what they currently earn, a question that feels relatively routine, is actually illegal in a growing number of jurisdictions. Pay transparency laws go even further. For instance, Colorado, New York, California, and Washington now require employers to post salary ranges in job listings. Failure to comply is not just a regulatory issue, but it also affects the quality of the candidate pool and the company's reputation on platforms like Glassdoor and LinkedIn. As far as drug testing, those rules vary significantly by state, particularly around cannabis. What is permissible pre-employment drug screening is one state may be prohibited in another. Now, states like New York and New Jersey have enacted specific protections for off-duty cannabis use. At-will employment, the default in most states, has meaningful exceptions that vary by jurisdiction. So implied contract exceptions, public policy exceptions, and covenant of good faith exceptions exist in different combinations across states, and they actually affect how terminations need to be handled. So, as far as money, the average settlement costs across employment-related claims runs well above $125,000 once legal fees and resolution costs are included. For a scaling company hiring across multiple states without a compliance framework, this is not a hypothetical risk. It's a matter of when, not if. So an ATS, or an applicant tracking system, is not just a database for resumes. A well-configured ATS is the operational backbone of a hiring system. It enforces process consistency, it creates an auditable record of every hiring decision, and it makes possible to analyze where the process is working and where it's breaking down. The challenge is that the ATS market is crowded, and the right choice depends heavily on company stage and hiring volume. So for early stage companies doing fewer than 50 hires per year, platforms like Jazz HR and Breezy HR offer strong functionality at accessible price points with intuitive setup and good integration with job boards. Now, for companies scaling past that threshold, Greenhouse and Lever are the enterprise-grade options. They're more powerful, more configurable, and they're more expensive, but they're built for the complexity that comes with structuring hiring at volume. Workable sits in a useful middle tier, offering a strong balance of features and usability for companies in the 50 to 200 hire per year range. And for small businesses and hourly workforce management, Homebase integrates scheduling and compliance tools alongside applicant tracking. So the platform choice matters less than the configuration. An ATS that is not set up with a defined pipeline, standardized stages, and consistent evaluation fields produces the same inconsistency as a spreadsheet. Now, the setup work, where you are defining stages, building in the scorecard criteria, configuring the right integrations, that's where the value is created. So one critical configuration point is that the ATS should be set up to capture structured evaluation data at each stage, not just move candidates through a funnel. And if the system can't produce a report showing why candidates were advanced or declined at each stage, it's not protecting the company in a compliance audit. Now, the best candidates in any market are not applying to every job they see. They're evaluating companies the same way companies evaluate candidates, and they're doing it before they ever submit an application. So in that sense, a company's employer brand is the sum of everything a candidate can learn about what it is actually like to work there. And it's being formed whether the company is actively managing it or not. So employer branding is not a marketing exercise. It's a talent acquisition strategy. So companies with strong employer brands receive significantly more applications per open role. They see higher offer acceptance rates, and they experience lower early tenure attrition because candidates who accepted the offer knew what they were walking into. The careers page is the most underinvested asset in most companies' hiring infrastructure. It's not enough to just list your open roles. A careers page that converts strong candidates communicates the company's mission and values in concrete terms. It describes the actual experience of working there, and it gives candidates a reason to choose this company over a competitor offering a similar role. Employee testimonials, not polished marketing copy, genuine voices from real team members, are among the most credible content a careers page can include. Glassdoor and Indeed profiles are not optional. Candidates do check those. And a company with no reviews looks like it has something to hide. A company with a thoughtful response to every review, positive and negative, signals that leadership is engaged and takes feedback seriously. The Glassdoor checklist is not about managing perception, it's about managing reality. Now, social media presence for employer branding is not about follower counts, it's more about consistency and authenticity. A LinkedIn page that shows the team, shares what the company is working on, and highlights the people behind the product creates a candidate experience before the first conversation ever happens. Now, hiring is one of the highest leverage activities a founder can invest in. Every person brought into the organization shapes the culture, the output, and the trajectory of the company. Running that process reactively without a scorecard, without structured interviews, without a compliance framework, without a configured ATS, without an employer brand, it's not just inefficient, it is expensive, legally exposed, and ultimately a ceiling on what the company can become. So the components covered today, the role scorecard, structured interviewing, the multi-state compliance, ATS setup, and employer branding, they're not advanced concepts reserved for companies with HR departments. They are the baseline infrastructure for any company that is serious about hiring well.